So Netflix released their numbers for the MVP card that they just ran, Gina Carano versus Ronda Rousey. That happened last Saturday night, and the global peak viewership for this was 17 million, which is not close to some of the other events that they've put on, but that's a massive, massive peak viewership for an MMA card. If I'm not mistaken, it's not the biggest in the US, but it is the biggest ever, like globally. So this is a huge success for Netflix, I'd say. However, my question to them is, where do you go from here? Because obviously you have a few things that you could do, right? If you want to be taken seriously as an MMA organization, there needs to be some sort of ranking system, some sort of belts. But then you run into the same issue that other organizations run into, which is a lack of talent. Now, maybe Netflix and MVP, they're not trying to compete with the UFC in the sense that, all right, we're going to build the biggest talent pool in the world of MMA fighters, but what they can do is build a few divisions where at the top they do actually have an argument for having the best fighters in their division in the world. You have Francis Ngannou already at heavyweight. He could be considered to be the best heavyweight on the planet. Technically, he's the lineal champion at the moment, and if by some miracle they're able to get their hands on Jon Jones, a Francis Ngannou-Jon Jones matchup on Netflix is absolutely massive, and I would venture to say that might even outperform Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua. That is a huge fight that Netflix should be trying desperately to get their hands on. You also have Mike Perry, so there's somebody who's a pretty big name, and if you want to go the route of having a championship belt, he could start out as one of your champions. Not to mention you have Muhammad Makayev on your hands, and if you can get that visa situation figured out, you also have an undefeated flyweight who probably is not the best in the world, but you have an argument to say so. Hey, this guy was in the UFC, he was too good, that's why the UFC cut him, and now we got our hands on the best flyweight in the world. Come over here if you want to try your hand at being the best flyweight in the world. The issue with these Netflix events, though, is they're kind of gimmicky. And I saw someone, the podcast, The Fight Lounge, they brought up a good point, which I want to reiterate. Every single person that was on that Netflix MMA card that had any sort of name got their name from the UFC. It's going to be a tall order to get anybody to care about somebody who hasn't come from the UFC coming over to Netflix. All of those big names made their big names in the UFC. I mean, Ronda Rousey's old. Francis Ngannou's getting up there in age. Mike Perry's getting up there in age. At a certain point, you're going to run out of these people who are willing to come over to Netflix unless Netflix absolutely starts to take off, which I think is possible if they do things like the Jon Jones and Ngannou matchup. But the thing that Netflix needs to do is, I would say, get away from the gimmicky fights, but that's also part of the allure, is the gimmick. And I don't know if Netflix can build a fan base of hardcore fans that are going to switch over from watching the UFC to Netflix. At what point do you run out of these gimmicky fights? Who knows? How long can you sustain a business model of poaching big names off of the UFC? I do think it would be a big mistake for Netflix to try and transition themselves into like a hardcore fan sort of organization, because then you're falling into the same trap that like the PFL and Bellator have fallen into. You're never going to outdo the UFC in terms of talent. It's never going to happen. So you're going to be this kind of second rank organization. Yes, you're going to pull a lot of views, but those views are going to dwindle over time because nobody's going to give a shit about it. So I think it's really interesting that Netflix was able to pull such a large portion of fans over to their card and to get to that 17 million number. I do think if the Rousey fight had maybe gone like 2 rounds, you would have maybe seen up into the 20 million peak viewership. Because I think 17 million did peak during the Ronda Rousey fight, which only lasted fucking 14 seconds. So you give that fight a little more time to develop, and I think you would reach a higher viewership. but can't go back. I think if you put on an Ngannou Jones matchup, that would be that would be a huge matchup, especially if you can get that done in the next like year or so, when both of those guys are, slightly past their primes, but still considered the best heavyweights in the world. Obviously, Tom Aspinall is technically the UFC champion and therefore technically the best heavyweight in the world. But you have an argument to make for one of those two, Jon Jones or Francis Ngannou, being the best heavyweight in the world. And as Netflix, I would be pushing for that as hard as we possibly could. Same thing with Muhammad Mokaev. Get him to a belt, whatever that MVP belt is going to look like, to try and at least somewhat compete with the UFC and say, hey, we actually have the best flyweight in the world. We have the best heavyweight in the world. And see what you can do from there. As far as other news goes, I want to talk about the Whitehouse card real quick, because I heard something on the Ariel Helwani show which was interesting. Dana White talking about the biggest issues he foresees with this card, one of which being weather, because this is an outdoor card. So what do you do if it rains? What do you do if there's lightning? Like, how is that going to affect the fighters? Hey, you're supposed to walk out in 20 minutes. Oh, actually, there's a fucking lightning storm rolling through. We're going to have to wait an hour. That could be a big mess up on their part if they're not prepared for it. I would have to imagine the UFC has some sort of backup plan if they know there's going to be some serious weather rolling through. Another thing, though, which I don't know how you solve this problem, is bugs. It's going to be hot as hell in June in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure anyone on the East Coast can attest, being outdoors at night in the summer, there's a significant amount of bugs and gnats and shit that are flying around. How is that going to affect the fighters? Now, I know that, like, any other sport that's played outside, right? Football, soccer, tennis even, they have to deal with the same issue. However, they're used to dealing with that issue. These guys that are fighters, I mean, you fight indoors for your entire life, and now you have to go fight outside. And you got fucking Cyril Gane trying to defend himself against head kicks from Alex Pereira, and you got fucking 50 gnats flying in your face. I could imagine that would be a little bit of a distraction. So, I don't know what you do. Maybe you put some fucking solar death rays above the fight so it attracts as many bugs as you can, or I mean, even, fuck if I know, put a little mesh cage above the cage so that bugs aren't able to fly in. Electrify it even. I don't know. I don't know what you do to solve that issue, but again, I'd have to imagine the UFC is in some way trying to figure out what do we do to combat this, because it is going to be at least some sort of distraction for the fighters. So I would hate to see this card, at the end of it, we have to talk about this. Well, I don't know. Sean O'Malley was winning that fight. He was about to knock out Ayman Zahabi, and he got stung by a bee. Like, what? That would just be the fucking worst. That would be, oh, God, I can't even imagine the absolute shitstorm that would be. Also, if it's like, we're halfway through the card, Mauricio Hoofy's walking out, and there's a strike of lightning a mile away, the fuck do you do then? What do you do in the middle, 2 minutes into round one, and there's lightning that gets too close and you have to shut down the event? Are you just going to start the fight right where it stopped? Like, how, picture this scenario. None of these guys are really grapplers per se, but for the sake of the argument, by some miracle, Michael Chandler takes Mauricio Hoofy's back with 3 minutes left in the round. And he's beating him up. It's a 10-8 round. And then there's a strike of lightning. And now you got to stop the fight. And Mauricio Hoofy's on the verge of, getting knocked out or getting submitted. That's not going to happen, but for the sake of the argument, hypothetically. And now you got to stop the fight and pick it back up. And you've given Mauricio Hoofy an hour to recover. Is he even able to recover? Like, what happens then? So it's a really, really weird thing that could go on here with the weather and with the bugs and just the natural environment that's going to interact with the fighters while they're fighting. Not to mention What if there's a heat wave that rolls through and it's 90 degrees out, and you got guys trying to fight their way through heat exhaustion while also fighting their opponent? A lot to consider. So I'll be interested to see how the UFC is able to deal with this and what kind of preventative measures they have in mind. So that's all I got for today. I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. But in the meantime, drop a like, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace out.